In the heart of Calabria, on the arid plain of La Masia Terme, stands a structure that is not a courthouse, but a fortress. A former call center, stripped of its original purpose and rebuilt with steel and concrete to host a war. This is the bunker courtroom of the Rinascita-Scott maxi trial, a term, maxi trial, reserved in Italian history for the state's most colossal battles against organized crime. Within its fortified walls, 355 defendants sit in metal cages, facing a court that will hear from over 900 witnesses. The numbers are staggering, designed to project the power of the Republic. It is the largest mafia trial in over 3 decades, a monumental attempt to bring to justice the most powerful and feared criminal organization in Italy, the Ndrangheta. To understand the architect, one must first understand the ground on which he built. Calabria, the toe of the Italian boot, a land of ancient, brutal beauty, but also a land historically forgotten. After World War II, while northern Italy experienced an economic miracle, Calabria sank into poverty, isolation, and a deep sense of abandonment by the central government in Rome. The local economy was a mere superficial appearance of well-being, a fragile facade sustained not by robust industry, but by a system of social welfare and remittances sent by the 1 million Calabrians forced to emigrate. This state abandonment was not a passive act. It was a condition that actively shaped the region's destiny. In an environment where the state was weak, absent, or simply complicit, a power vacuum was created. And nature, like politics, abhors a vacuum. The Ndrangheta did not emerge simply to oppose the state. It grew to replace it. Where the state failed to offer justice, the Mafia offered its version of dispute resolution. Where there were no economic opportunities, the Mafia created its own. The testimony of a citizen from Nicotera, recorded in court archives, is chilling in its normalcy. After being robbed, he went to the local Carabinieri station. The marshal, the representative of the state, advised him that instead of filing a report, he should go to Luigi Mancuso. The citizen did so, and within 2 hours, his property was returned. This incident reveals a fundamental truth. The state was not simply defeated by the Ndrangheta. On many levels, it abdicated, ceding its authority and legitimacy, becoming an unwitting co-founder of the very power it claimed to fight. In this breeding ground, in the 1970s, in the small town of Limbadi, province of Vibo Valentia, a clan that would become the most influential in the region took root, the Mancusos. Like all Ndrine, their initial strength lay in blood ties, a genetic code of loyalty and silence that made them nearly impenetrable. The patriarch Giuseppe Mancuso, known as Don Pepe, and his sons laid the foundation. One of them, Francesco Don Ciccio Mancuso, personified the clan's brazen power. In 1985, he was elected mayor of Limbadi while a fugitive from justice. They were the law, the authority, and the government, all in one. But it was during the 1970s and 1980s that the Ndrangheta as a whole would take a quantum leap. While the Sicilian Cosa Nostra was bleeding itself dry in an all-out war against the Italian state, the more discreet and pragmatic Calabrian clans found their niche, kidnapping for ransom. They are estimated to have carried out over 200 kidnappings, terrorizing Italy's wealthiest families. The most notorious case was that of John Paul Getty III in 1973, the grandson of the American oil tycoon. The multi-million-dollar ransoms were not squandered on ostentatious luxuries. They were a strategic accumulation of capital. This money, stained with fear and violence, became the seed investment that allowed the Ndrangheta to enter the business that would transform it from a regional threat into a global empire, the transatlantic cocaine trade. They forged direct alliances with Colombian cartels, and within a few years, they came to control up to 80% of the cocaine entering Europe. They had found the source of almost limitless financial power. And upon this mountain of money and power, a young member of the Mancuso clan would begin to plan a new era. Born in 1954, Luigi Mancuso was the youngest of the patriarch Don Pepe's 11 children. He grew up observing power in its rawest form, but unlike many of his contemporaries, his ambition was not limited to extortion and violence. He was a strategist, a chess player in a world of thugs. His rise was meteoric. By the early 1990s, at less than 40 years old, he was no longer just an influential member of his clan. He was a heavyweight figure throughout the Ndrangheta. His stature was such that, according to an informant, he participated in high-level summits with the bosses of the Sicilian Cosa Nostra to discuss a unified strategy of terrorism against the Italian state. His vision always extended beyond the borders of Calabria. It was at this time that Mancuso began to perfect his masterpiece, the dual empire. While consolidating absolute feudal control over the province of Vibo Valentia, becoming the final authority to whom even the police deferred, he simultaneously built bridges to what prosecutors would call the gray zone. This was a symbiotic network of white-collar professionals, entrepreneurs, officials, and politicians who, in exchange for votes and favors, placed their skills and contacts at the service of the clan. But for these two worlds, the criminal and the supposedly legitimate, to interact safely and efficiently, an interface was needed, a secret space of trust and mutual obligation. Mancuso found it in rogue Masonic lodges. These secret brotherhoods became the clearinghouse for Ndrangheta 2.0, the place where illicit pacts were sealed with a handshake, far from the ears of the state. At the center of this network was Mancuso's most valuable asset, Giancarlo Pitelli, a man with a foot in each world. He was a renowned criminal lawyer, a former senator from Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia party, and, according to investigators, an influential member of the Freemasons. Pitelli was the perfect facilitator, the translator who could move with equal ease through the halls of Parliament in Rome and in discreet meetings with the Supreme One. A conversation intercepted on April 27, 2018, captures the essence of their cynical collaboration. Pitelli and Mancuso are discussing the dissolution of the Limbadi City Council for Mafia infiltration. Mancuso, with absolute coldness, comments, "They did the right thing. The only time they did the right thing, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword." Pitelli asks who the mayor was. "A communist," Mancuso replies with disdain. Pitelli joins in the mockery, "Damn right." The recording reveals not just their alliance, but a shared worldview, where real power resides with them, not in the democratic institutions they despise. In June 1993, the state struck. Mancuso was arrested in Operation Tirreno and sentenced to 30 years in prison. For any other boss, it would have been the end. But for Mancuso, his 19-year incarceration became a strategic retreat. From inside maximum security prisons, his legend only grew. His power endured, to the point that in 2012, with Vibo Valentia engulfed in a bloody war between clans, the Mafia families themselves pulled their strings to secure his early release. The reason was astonishing. Only the authority of Luigi Mancuso could restore peace. The state, unable to impose order, saw its most dangerous prisoner summoned back to power by the criminal world itself. He did not return as a defeated man. He returned as a king called to reclaim his throne. The period between 2012 and his final arrest in 2019 was the golden age of Mancuso's reign. Once free, he set his grand design in motion on an unprecedented scale. He was the peacemaker, the uncle who settled disputes, but he was also the CEO of a diversified economic empire. Cocaine, public contracts, wind energy, tourism, agriculture. His power was so vast, his network so deep, that one of his affiliates, Giovanni Giamborino, described it in an intercepted conversation with a phrase that says it all. Luigi doesn't need to ask who is in Nicotera, in Reggio, or in this place or that. He has the roof of the world. If anyone is there, it's always him at the top of everything. But every empire has an end. In the freezing pre-dawn hours of December 19th, 2019, the Italian state unleashed Operation Rinascita-Scott. 3,000 police officers, in a coordinated raid across Europe, mobilized to decapitate the Mancuso clan. The architect of this offensive, prosecutor Nicola Gratteri, a man who has lived under police escort for over 30 years, finally had his target. Luigi Mancuso, the Supreme One, was arrested again. It seemed like the definitive victory, the end of an era. But Gratteri and his team had a secret weapon, one more devastating than any raid or wiretap. They had a witness willing to break the blood oath, the omerta, and reveal the clan's deepest secrets from within. The state thought it had captured the king, but the war for his kingdom would not be decided in a courtroom. It would be decided by a betrayal of blood. The key to destroying the supreme leader of the Ndrangheta was his own family. The star witness, the man who would sit before the judges to testify against his uncle, was Emanuele Mancuso. To dismantle an empire built on blood, you need a betrayal of blood. Prosecutor Nicola Gratteri's secret weapon was not an undercover agent or a sophisticated surveillance system. It was a man born into the heart of the Ndrangheta's royalty, Emanuele Mancuso. Born in 1988, Emanuele was no ordinary soldier. He was the son of Pantaleone Mancuso, l'ingénieur, the engineer, one of the clan's most feared and respected brothers, and the direct nephew of the supreme one, Luigi Mancuso. Growing up with the Mancuso name was not a choice, it was a destiny. From a young age, he was indoctrinated into the system, participating in the family's core activities. He was not a high-level boss, but his value to prosecutors lay precisely in his position. He was a trusted operative, a man with direct knowledge of the criminal machinery at its most intimate, day-to-day level. His testimony, recorded over hours of interrogations, is not that of a general describing a war from a map. It's that of a soldier describing the mud of the trenches. He speaks with a chilling normality about the clan's daily life, how disputes over petty thefts were settled under the final authority of his uncle Luigi, how bombs were planted on command, or how marijuana plantations were managed, a field in which Prosecutor Gratteri himself considered him one of the most competent experts he had ever met. Emanuele's credibility came not from his rank, but from his proximity. He was the ground truth of the Mancuso Empire. His words offered an unprecedented window into the clan's inner life, revealing not only its criminal operations but also its alliances, its hierarchies, and its deep internal rivalries. By deciding to talk, he wasn't just confessing to crimes. He was translating the secret language of the Ndrangheta for the state. He was providing the instruction manual for dismantling his own family. What can lead a man to break the Ndrangheta's most sacred oath? The omerta, a code sealed by blood ties. For Emanuele Mancuso, the answer wasn't fear of a long sentence or the promise of a new life. It was the birth of his daughter in 2018. In his own words, he began collaborating with justice driven by the hope of offering my daughter a different future. It was an attempt to break the generational curse, to prevent his daughter from growing up in a world where the Mancuso name was both a privilege and a life sentence. The clan's reaction to his betrayal was a masterclass in psychological warfare, revealing the true nature of the family. There were no regrets or attempts at redemption. There was a strategic counteroffensive designed to destroy him. From prison, his brother Giuseppe sent him threatening messages. Don't talk, words have a price. And later, a chilling ultimatum. I will disown you if you go with Gratteri. But the most insidious pressure came from the women of the clan. His mother, Giovannina, his aunt Rosaria, and crucially, his former partner, Ndrangheta, orchestrated a campaign to neutralize him. They bombarded him with insults, drug addict, liar, piece of shit, while trying to have him declared mentally incompetent, a malatu, a sick man whose word was worthless. They offered him money, businesses, a life abroad, anything to buy his silence. The cruelest and most cynical tactic was to use his own daughter as a weapon. Ndrangheta, remaining loyal to the clan, used access to the child as a tool of emotional blackmail, a lever to force him to recant. This created a heartbreaking legal and human situation. The state protected the pentito father, while the mother, aligned with the Ndrangheta, retained custody, turning every visit into a form of psychological torture. The Mancuso family's response exposes the core ideology of the Ndrangheta. The family is not a source of affection, but the organization itself. Loyalty is not to the individual, but to the system. the well-being of a child, the love of a father, all are secondary to preserving the clan's power and the inviolability of the omerta. In their attempt to destroy Emanuele, the Mancuso clan proved to the world that their code of honor is a self-destructive myth that devours its own children. For decades, the Ndrangheta was considered almost impenetrable. Its structure, based on direct family ties, made it far more resistant to betrayal than the Sicilian Cosa Nostra. Emanuele Mancuso's decision was not a mere crack. It was an earthquake that shook the organization's foundations. The impact of his testimony was devastating. He provided a detailed map of the clan's network of corruption, naming the unfaithful carabinieri, who tipped them off about impending raids, and the businessmen who acted as frontmen for their businesses. He described with precision the role of his uncle Luigi as the great peacemaker, the only one whose authority could stop the bloody internal wars that threatened to destabilize the empire. But his most important contribution was to validate the prosecution's central thesis, the existence of a gray zone. Emanuele confirmed from the inside what investigators could only suspect through wiretaps: a symbiotic network of professionals, politicians, and crucially, Freemasons who worked at the service of the clan. Emanuele's testimony did more than provide evidence. It provided a narrative. Mafia organizations are built and legitimized through shared narratives, through internal stories and codes that give them cohesion. Emanuele gave the state the Mancuso clan's internal story, its language, its logic, its myths. This allowed prosecutors not just to present isolated facts, but to weave them into a coherent story of a criminal enterprise. They gave the court the ability to see the clan not as they wanted to be seen, as men of honor, but as they truly were. The trial ceased to be a legal battle and became a battle of narratives. And thanks to Emanuele, the state finally had the enemy's script. On January 13, 2021, on the industrial plain of La Messia Terme, the doors to the theater of war were opened. The bunker courtroom, custom-built for the Rinascita-Scott maxi trial, was not a courthouse. It was a statement of intent. A 3,300 square meter former call center converted into a fortress of concrete and steel, designed to hold over 1,000 people and withstand an attack. The scene was a spectacle of judicial power unprecedented in recent Italian history. Inside, 355 defendants, many sitting in metal cages, others connected by video conference from maximum security prisons across the country. An army of over 600 lawyers prepared for the legal battle. The reading of the defendants' names, a solemn and marathon-like ritual, lasted more than 3 hours. The initial media attention was global. Journalists from all over the world flocked to Calabria to witness the start of the biggest Mafia trial in over 30 years. However, the complexity of the case, the endless list of witnesses, and the ban on recording the hearings caused interest to fade quickly. The trial of the century became, for the rest of the world, a local news story, a distant echo of a war fought on the periphery of Europe. This public disinterest was, in a way, a posthumous victory for Luigi Mancuso's strategy. His Ndrangheta 2.0, an organization that thrives on the invisibility and complexity of finance and politics, is intrinsically less cinematic than the overt brutality of the old Cosa Nostra. The construction of the bunker was the state's response to a military-grade threat. But the empty press benches in the following months were a grim reminder that the hardest battle is not fought against the soldiers, but against the indifference that allows their power to become normalized and invisible. In the Grand Theater of Rinascita-Scott, the protagonist, Luigi Mancuso, was notably absent, his trial held separately, but his work, his system, was on the stand. Without the architect present, the prosecution focused its attack on the pillar that supported the entire structure of Ndrangheta 2.0, the facilitator, the man who served as the bridge between the criminal world and the world of legitimate power. That man was Giancarlo Pitelli. Pitelli was the perfect embodiment of the gray zone, a highly prestigious criminal lawyer, an influential former senator from Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia party, and, according to investigators and his own admission, a member of the Freemasons. He was a man with a foot in each world, capable of moving with the same ease through the halls of Parliament in Rome, as in discreet meetings with the heads of the Ndrangheta. For the prosecution, he was not simply the clan's lawyer, he was their passepartout, the master key that opened the doors of politics, finance, and institutions. The evidence presented at trial painted a portrait of systemic complicity. Testimonies and wiretaps suggested that Patelli leaked confidential information from investigations, assisted in money laundering operations, and, most importantly, placed his network of political and Masonic contacts at the service of Luigi Mancuso. The Masonic connection was the crucial element. The modern Ndrangheta needed a secret, trusted space where illicit pacts between criminals, businessmen, and politicians could be sealed far from prying ears. The rogue Masonic lodges, according to the prosecution, provided that sanctuary. The intercepted statement of another clan boss, Pantaleon Mancuso, was revealing. The Ndrangheta no longer exists. Now the Ndrangheta is part of the Freemasonry. It's under the Freemasonry. Giancarlo Patelli's trial thus became the trial of the documentary's central thesis. It was not a matter of proving whether he was a formal affiliate, but whether his professional and political life had fundamentally served the interests of the Mancuso empire. His case forced the court and Italy to confront an uncomfortable question. In a society infiltrated by the Mafia, where does the work of an influential professional end and complicity begin? The answer to that question would define the legacy of Rinascita-Scott. Emanuele Mancuso's betrayal opened a breach in the Ndrangheta's wall of silence, and through it, an avalanche began. The prosecution's case did not rest on a single pillar. It was built on a chorus of internal voices, more than 50 collaborators of justice who, for the first time, decided to tell the organization's secrets from within. Among them, a key figure stood out: Andrea Mantella. Unlike Emanuele, Mantella was not an heir, but a self-made boss. A man of violence, former leader of the Lo Bianco Ndrina in Vibo Valentia. A confessed murderer who had been a protagonist and architect of the bloody power struggles in the province. His testimony was that of an enemy general, an expert on the power dynamics, alliances, and betrayals that defined Calabria's criminal landscape. Mantella's statements were crucial. They corroborated Luigi Mancuso's role as the supreme one, the only one with the authority to impose peace among the warring clans after his release in 2012. But his most explosive testimony pointed directly at the gray zone. Mantella claimed that the Mancusos, through the lawyer Giancarlo Patelli, paid off judges to obtain favorable sentences, providing a direct and brutal link between the clan and corruption at the heart of the judicial system. The large number of pentiti in Rinascita-Scott marked a cultural turning point. The myth of the Ndrangheta's impenetrability, forged over a century of silence and family loyalty, was shattered in the bunker courtroom of La Mezzia Terme. This massive collapse of the Omertà suggests that Luigi Mancuso's reign, though effective, was built on a fragile peace imposed by fear. The mass raids of Operation Rinascita-Scott removed the peacemaker from the board, and the old rivalries and hatreds, which Mancuso had managed to contain, erupted in a cascade of testimonies. The state was not just prosecuting the Ndrangheta, it was using the organization's own internal violence as a weapon to destroy it. On November 20th, 2023, after nearly 3 years of hearings and more than a month of closed-door deliberations, the silence in the La Mezzia Terme bunker courtroom was broken by the voice of the presiding judge, Brigida Cavassino. Judgment Day had arrived. The verdict was a judicial earthquake. The court handed down 207 convictions, totaling more than 2,200 years in prison and 131 acquittals. The ruling largely confirmed the structure of the indictment, recognizing the existence and operation of the Ndrine of the Vibo Valentia area and their submission to the Mancuso power structure. The sentences reflected the hierarchy of criminal power. The military heads of the most important clans received the harshest penalties. Saverio Razionale and Paolino Lo Bianco, leaders of historic clans in Vibo Valentia, were sentenced to the maximum penalty of 30 years imprisonment, a sentence that amounted to the decapitation of their respective organizations. Pasquale Gallone, considered Luigi Mancuso's right-hand man and his most trusted confidant, had already been sentenced to 20 years in a fast-track trial, neutralizing the Supreme One's inner circle. But the most significant conviction, the one that validated the fundamental thesis of the entire operation, was that of Giancarlo Pitelli. The former senator and lawyer was found guilty of external competition in a Mafia association and sentenced to 11 years in prison. His conviction was the judicial confirmation that the bridge between the Ndrangheta and power was not a theory, but a proven reality. The trial also confirmed infiltration into law enforcement, with the conviction of Carabinieri Colonel Giorgio Naselli. However, the verdict also exposed the complexities and limits of justice. High-profile political figures, such as the former mayor of Pizzo, Gianluca Calippo, for whom the prosecution had requested 18 years, were acquitted. This outcome demonstrated the enormous difficulty of proving criminal complicity at the highest levels of public administration. The trial had won the war against the Ndrangheta's army, but the battle against the gray zone was proving to be much more complex and elusive. While the Rinascita-Scott verdict dismantled his army, the king, Luigi Mancuso, watched from a distance. His legal fate was decided on other battlefields, a fact that, paradoxically, only cemented his status as the Supreme One. He was on a different level, too big even for the largest maxi trial in recent history. His main conviction came just a few weeks after the Lamezia Terme verdict. In December 2023, in a separate trial known as Betrayal Mafia, Luigi Mancuso was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The crime was not local extortion or small-scale drug trafficking. It was the systematic infiltration of the national fuel market, a multi-billion-dollar business. This showed that his vision went far beyond Calabria. His target was the Italian economy as a whole. His figure transcends even the borders of the Ndrangheta. Court documents from the Ndrangheta Stregista trial place him in the late 80s and early 90s, participating in top-level meetings with the heads of the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, such as Giuseppe Graviano, to plan a unified terrorist strategy against the Italian state. At less than 40 years old, he was already considered a worthy interlocutor for the architects of the Capaci and Via d'Amelio massacres. Luigi Mancuso, even in defeat, achieved his ultimate goal, transcendence. By separating his legal fate from that of his soldiers, he maintained his aura of untouchable power. He was not judged as just another boss in a cage. He was convicted as the CEO of an economic empire and as a historical player in the Mafia's war against the Republic. His defeat was as monumental as his ambition, the ultimate proof that he was not a simple capo, but the architect of a new era of organized crime. Was Rinascita-Scott the state's definitive victory over the Ndrangheta? Yes and no. It was a historic blow, undoubtedly the hardest the organization has ever received. It decapitated an entire generation of leaders, dismantled entire clans, and most importantly, broke the code of silence on a massive scale. For the first time, the Court of Cassation, Italy's Supreme Court, recognized and certified the existence and unitary structure of the Ndrangheta in the province of Vibo Valentia, validating the core of the prosecution's work and creating an unassailable legal precedent. However, the Ndrangheta is not a pyramid that collapses if the top is removed. It is a hydra. Its power lies not in a single leader, but in its cellular structure, a network of family clans, the Ndrine, which are both autonomous and interconnected. Cutting off one head, or even 200, does not kill the beast. Its capacity for regeneration, rooted in blood ties and its immense global wealth, is formidable. The trial was, in essence, the definitive autopsy of Luigi Mancuso's Ndrangheta 2.0 model. It exposed with terrifying clarity its fusion of archaic codes of honor with global capitalism, of feudal territorial control with the complicity of the elites. It demonstrated that the true strength of the modern Ndrangheta lies not just in violence, but in its ability to infiltrate the legal economy, distort markets, and stifle legitimate growth. Rinascita-Scott was a necessary and courageous response, but it is also a warning. The state won this battle, but the Ndrangheta, having learned from Mancuso's playbook, has already evolved. The new war will be quieter, fought not in bunker courtrooms, but in boardrooms, in law offices, and in the encrypted channels of global finance. The gray zone of complicity remains its most fertile ecosystem. The Lamezia Terme courtroom is now empty, a monument to a historic victory in a war that is far from over. And in the silence of its walls, an unsettling question resonates. While the state was celebrating its triumph, what new powers, more discreet, more sophisticated, were already emerging to occupy the empty throne of the Supreme One?